A word to the wise. We are an explicit podcast tackling content with adult themes as well as entering spoiler territory if you aren't caught up with us. That would be through chapter 66 of Brandon Sanderson's The Lost Metal. I'm not fucking with it this time. I'm not doing it. You're waiting for me to fuck with it.
Hey there, this is Cross.
And I'm PJ.
And we are Words and Whiskey, a podcast for veteran and novice readers alike. We tackle fiction novels and love to talk about what we're drinking. You should think of us as your intoxicating weekly book club.
I am very aerodynamic today because I yesterday was trimming up my beard before going out and fucked up. I clipped myself and then there was no fixing it, so I just shaved everything.
Oh no.
So I am smooth and fast.
Smooth, fast, and pure.
Yes.
I genuinely, I cannot remember the last time I saw you without facial hair.
It's been a long time.
I think it did happen during Tales of Kana at one point, because I think so. Because I remember everyone being like, whoa, or like Mathar maybe being like, whoa, PJ's clean, like baby.
So I'm not wearing my glasses today, so I just look really off.
You look straight out of high school. Like,
that's true.
High school PJ. There's anything wrong with it. I mean, you had more hair in high school, so there's that. But
yeah.
I mean, you choose to shave. I'm not saying you're going bald, but yet.
It'll happen.
I mean, it comes for us all, right? Like, one way or another.
My family, particularly so.
Yeah, your family has it particularly bad. My dad still has a good head of hair, as did my grandfather on my mother's side. So I should be okay. Yeah. Doing fine right now. We'll see.
You're doing okay.
I'm doing okay.
Got to keep that emo hair.
Could be worse. I do. I got to keep it going. Otherwise, I lose like all of my credibility. Like
most of your personality.
Yes. Yep. You're right. Today is our 6th episode discussing The Lost Metal by Brandon Sanderson. We're going to chat about chapters 58 through 66. But before we get too much further, PJ, this is our penultimate episode for this book, which is interesting. We'll talk about that maybe in a moment, but we should talk about what we're drinking. What are we having on this fine Sunday night?
So, I, taking inspiration from you from last week, did just a standard Jungle Bird. So that is 2 ounces of pineapple juice. I always double the lime, I think, as I've talked about before. So 1 ounce of lime juice, half an ounce of simple syrup, 3/4 of an ounce of Campari, and 1.5 ounces of rum. I've got Mount Gay XO. It's a Barbados rum, but play around with it. Whatever. The recipe specifically calls for black blended rum, but I do not have any. So it's delicious. I really do think that adding that extra lime juice really just touches it in the right direction for me. But yeah, I've talked about Jungle Birds before. They're delicious. You should drink them. To follow that up with my back half beer. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, you know what's really fun? I am drinking the same thing that I had last week, which is basically a Jungle Bird with green chartreuse and lemon instead. So your recipe works for me. Just swap the lemon out and the Campari for green chartreuse and maraschino.
Yep. Yep. I have a really fucking weird beer. Like, it's really off the walls strange. It is referred to as a fruit pizza sour.
Interesting.
It is called Please Accept Our Sacrifice of Fruit Pizza. I don't know if that's talking about like gummy, like those gummy like cheeseburgers and pizzas and stuff that you could get at like novelty candy stores and stuff. I don't know. But the flavors involved are strawberry, blueberry, kiwi, orange, cream cheese frosting, and sugar cookies.
So that is a really great and helpful definition, because that actually does make it fruit pizza, the food, the dessert, which is a thing. So basically what fruit pizza is it's a bunch of fresh fruit on top of a crust of some kind, and then cream cheese is kind of the like in between the fruit.
Gotcha.
A lot to simulate pizza, basically. So
okay. I'm learning.
That's the idea. Interesting. I loved your pitch, though, on it being the gummy thing, because I thought that, too, until you said the cream cheese. And then I was like, I bet it's actual fruit pizza that they're imitating. So that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can definitely taste the cream cheese flavor in here.
That hurts.
Not...
I don't like it.
Not in a bad way. If that makes sense, like when you smelled cream cheese frosting, how you can like tell that it's cream cheese frosting, you know, like it's not like it smells like cream cheese like you'd put on a bagel, but like that hint of cream, like sweet cream cheese. It's feels way more disgusting to describe it like this than it tastes, but it actually tastes oddly pretty good. There is not a fucking hint of anything sour in this. Like, it is not sour at all. It tastes like fruit punch. It tastes like a tiki drink in like the most abstract way. It's super weird. Or not a tiki drink. Like, it tastes like a fruity cocktail.
Okay.
In a very odd way. But I love sours that are actually super, super sour. So it's kind of disappointing that there's nothing tart to it, but still.
Right.
I kind of like it. It's goofy. The can art's hilarious. The name's obviously off the wall.
Amazing. Yeah. So, I know who it's from, but for everyone else, I don't think you said.
Drecker Brewing Company out of Fargo, North Dakota.
Cool. Yeah. Awesome. I love Drecker. For those of you of whom live in a state in which they can mail you beer through one of the subscription services, Drecker is on most of them. I think Tavor and the other big one. And so order some Drecker. They're great. If you haven't tried them, I would highly recommend. What's so crazy, I don't think I've ever been like super disappointed in a Drecker beer, because there's like a pretty good bottom layer level of consistency. There are some that are much better than others, though.
That's fair. That's true.
Yeah.
But generally, like, their sours, like, they're not typically super, super sour, but they are knockout, like, fruited beers.
Right. They've got some of the best fruited sours I've ever had, for sure.
You do have to be careful with those shipping services when you're dealing with those beers, because if it gets too warm, they will start to re-ferment, and like happened to Crossland when I shipped him some beer. No, I didn't. If you're a postal person, I didn't mail him alcohol. That wasn't true. But when I shipped him beer, it exploded on his porch because it re-fermented and the pressure got to it. So got to be careful with that. But in general, yes, absolutely. Check that out. The shipping services, I think they usually ship them in like a refrigerator. They'll have like an insulated sort of refrigerated shipping thing, like a lot of those like meal delivery services do. So should be okay. But I just put them in a bunch of socks and shipped them to Crossland. That didn't work that well.
It worked. I mean, it really worked.
The 10 beers worked.
Yeah. I mean, it's fair. And the box was like, what was so crazy about it too is like the box was so great in condition, I'm assuming, until that moment, because it had to have popped while it was in the storage, I assume, because there's no way they would have brought it if it was like dripping wet, I assume. So I think it happened when it was in the Amazon container.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. So,
probably.
Cool. All right. Well, that's what we're drinking. So very excited. But PJ, I want to add a little something to this game. So before we talk about the chapters, I do want to talk about how you're feeling with this week's reading. But I want to mention here at the very top of talking about this book, there's a lot of reflection on Era 1 in particular in this section. Like, it's almost a focal point of like bringing up all these comparisons between Era 1 highlight moments and what's going on right now, to the point of where I feel like it's overly heavy-handed. I don't like it. I think it's kind of cheesy and cheap in most of the ways it's done. Not all. I'll get to the ones that I like versus the ones that I dislike. But I do want to add a little rule and stipulation for our thing. And we haven't done something like this in a long time, so it'll be fun. But I think we're going to add a drink each time Era 1 is brought up this episode, if you're down. Because it's going to happen. Now, my question is it textual, or is it anytime we bring up Era 1?
I think it's when we bring up Era 1. Because there's a lot more that I want to talk about.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, how heavy of a drink do we get a separate drink for it of like a pour of spirits?
Maybe. I don't have a beer, so I'm just going to drink this guy. And maybe when we're out, we'll like reload with an old fashioned or something like that if we need to, or beer, whatever's reasonable. You don't have to go do whatever you like. I don't know if it needs to be separate or not, but maybe it makes sense for it to be separate. Actually, now that you say that, because then we won't just burn through what we have and like die.
Yeah, I might just go pour myself some whiskey. I don't think mellow corn. I've got some good whiskey. I want to sip on.
Cool. So before we pour that, let's talk about the reflection on Era 1 just to start with, and just to kind of get this out of the way. That way we can, make the rest a drinking game as we kind of go through it. But what do you make of all the reflection? What do you make of the reading this week, for the record? And then also kind of pintailing that with thoughts on reflection on Era 1.
I felt like this week was, it was so many resolutions without really being resolved. Like, it's the climaxes. This is climax the episode.
Yeah, basically,
because we cut everything off right before like there's any resolution to it. But it's also, I think, a great take on redemption that is a little bit counter to what we've talked about as far as our perception of Brandon's feelings on redemption. It felt like that got circumvented or overcome a little bit, which felt really good.
I definitely want to talk about that, and there will be a whole conversation in here. It's the first thing in this chapter, basically, to talk about. But I do agree with you, and I definitely want to circle around on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. It is climax the section, and that to say that we still have next week. Like, we still have another week, and can you imagine? Like, we're not done, and like all of this shit's happened. We still have to go deal with other shit yet. What the fuck?
Yep.
As all of these come like basically rolling over the finish line. It's 3 different resolutions, basically, at least, that we're talking about as we think about it. So I do want to bring up, talking about the reflection on Era 1, I feel like it's a little cheap. I feel like it's kind of playing on our emotions that were built up in the previous books and our reaction to them, and kind of like, as opposed to eliciting an emotion or a feeling, to bring these things back up and then use them as comparison points to what people are going through, feels a little cheap, especially with the frequency in which it happens. I think that's my issue. As opposed to it just being a parallel that could have existed on its own. The solution for Marasi being to think like Elend and burn all the power out in the same way, specifically, and like bringing up that it was just like the last Emperor, and then also with Wayne being like, I wish we could have gone through the window like Vin, and like, there are all of these different moments, and I don't think that lands for me almost at all. It's maybe my biggest criticism of the prose or writing of any of this is it feels almost fanficky, and that is...
I can see that, and I would... and I agree, but I am going to step back a little bit and be a little bit cautious about it, because... Does it feel that way? And does it feel so heavy-handed because of the way we approach this story and section it off and like hyper focus on?
No, I felt that way when I read it the first time.
Okay,
I'm not gonna lie.
Fair enough.
I felt that way when I got to this part. I was like, why are we the one that feels really great of them all? Like, most of them are okay. They're like, why? Like, it would be fine if it were 1 or 2, but the fact that it happens so frequently. But the one that actually rules is the image of Harmony that of Sazed that Harmony gives to Wax. That one is amazing, and like that hits in the way that it should, because it's not trying to tell us precisely what something is. It gives us a comparison that we kind of work out. We're being shown, not told, and as is Wax.
Okay. So how do you feel about the ones that aren't explicitly said but are very clearly evocative?
I'm okay with it being evocative.
Well, so I guess that's my point, is that there are so many that are explicitly said that I feel like it puts you in the mindset to really dial into these other ones that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise. Like,
I think my whole thing is dialing into that, though. Like, I know, that's my whole vibe.
I agree. But I'm trying to play devil's advocate. I'm trying to like...
Yeah, I understand.
Like, the one for me that I really liked is the Death Incarnate scene. And how that feels so similar to the Vin and Zane raid on Set's stronghold. Like,
yeah,
that felt really good. And I'm curious, like, I'm really curious if I would have keyed into it as much as I did. I probably would have.
I think you would have. I think that's the thing. That's why it feels weird, is because it's like, it is, to me, it is like literally clinically show don't tell. And we were told and then shown. And that's why I feel really weird about it, is like, if you would have just shown, I would have drawn the connection between Marasi and Elend like immediately, because it is very similar. And that's okay. Like, it's good for the, it's like removing some dramatic irony payoff, right? So the payoff of like being like, oh, this is reminiscent, as opposed to being like told the mystery or like told the thing versus discovering it. Completely different.
Yeah, that one specifically, I wonder how could she have known to do that if not for directly like referencing the historical text, you know? Like that's the one where it's like, all right, what do you do here? And they have to draw off of the historical like myth. I don't know.
Yeah, I can see that one. Here's the thing. I can make a case for one of these. I can't make a case for all of them. That's the problem, is that it's like, I think you can reasonably draw one of the connections, to your point, to like get your brain going on one of these things, to draw that connection with one, and then to get everyone's head like really spinning about thinking about Era 1 from a meta text, from a like, this is how we create it perspective. So yeah, I guess that's kind of my thing that kind of bogs me down a little bit with it, is that it's not the end all be all, though. For the record, I still really like it all. It's just like the biggest nitpick that I had. If I were the editor in this circumstance, I feel like I would have been like, we got to figure out a slightly less heavy-handed way to do this, because this feels like it came out of a teenage kid who wants you to feel those things but doesn't know how to make you feel them.
Right.
Except for he does. That's the other problem, is that he does, because he does it in a couple of other spaces. So it's like, it's a weird conflict that I have with it. And by no means am I trying to belittle Brandon Sanderson. I'm just using a comparison of like, I think that middle schoolers do this in writing when you're like trying to figure it out. And sometimes that's like a draft. And also the other side of this is that this book in this series is a little YA adjacent. Like, all of Mistborn is a little, you can construe parts of it as YA adjacent. This book is much more raunchy than the previous couple of books in the series, but I think you can make the case that this is still accessible for kids. So if you're handing this to a teenager, I wouldn't have a problem with a teenager reading this or anything like that, but I can see leaving those seeds for other people if it's not, you know, a mature leaning piece of fiction. Does that make sense? Yeah,
that's fair.
Yeah, so that's my own devil's advocate defense for why you would leave those in, but neither here nor there. Not the biggest deal in the world, but something that I wanted to mention at the top, especially if we're going to cut out talking about Era 1. Now we're going to cut out, because I have it written in the script a couple of times, or the notes. It's not a script, but I have it written in the notes a couple of times as points because it's brought up. So, you know, we'll talk about it. All right. With that, let's get into, did you have anything else?
No.
So before we go into the chapters, I know we just said that we were going to do that, but we did go and pour ourselves the thing that we're going to be drinking. So, PJ, what are you having for your Era 1 sipper?
I have Noble Oak Double Oaked Rye. So just nice. A nice little finger and a half of that.
Yeah. I decided on doing something a little nutty, since it's the nutty episode in this way that we're adding this. I poured out of my infinity bottle.
I almost did that.
Whiskey.
I almost did that.
I poured 2 ounces. So yeah, that's about that. The thing is like, it's close to full with all of the various whiskeys and like adding stuff from it. So it wasn't quite there, because you don't want to technically, like, you don't want to start drinking it until it's all full, and then you start downing it, and then you add more and whatever else. But it was almost there. So I was like, you know what, we'll just go for it, because that's fun for this episode. So
yeah, for sure.
And it's good.
Infinity bottles are so much fun.
Yeah. Ooh, that is hotter than I thought it would be. Oh, that's a wild kick. Okay, interesting. Fun. All right, let's get started with this episode. So, breaking it down, getting into chapter 58 here. we start off with bottle caps, like we had made mention of last week. I had totally blanked that this happened this way. It's one of those small details that like you don't think about. But I'm so glad that we put so much focus onto how cool and natural it would be to like spin off a bottle cap, and then literally it happens in the next chapter.
It happens like, in the next fucking sentence.
Right. Yeah, literally it's week to week we ended. Fair point. Fair fucking point. But I love that. But starting off the show, we get a drink while Wayne stores up some of the health and shares his beer with Wax. Well, they share a beer, rather. And they spend it reminiscing on the good old days, as it were. And they have a frankly somber conversation about what Wayne is worth as he has deemed himself useless. And there is a really well done bit here about the difference between forgiveness and fundamentally changing who you are. That I think is really well done, actually. You'd expect, given my like penchant for tearing into this ideology a bit previously, I think even in my first read, I didn't love it, that I'd have a bigger gripe. But I think that ultimately Wax is very right here. I think that there's an important line that this meshes very well with kind of what Brandon said before, is that like, you know, forgiveness is a thing that's he hasn't really talked about forgiveness, but he talked about redemption, and those are different things. So I really like this. I think that he's right. You don't necessarily need to earn forgiveness. You only earn it if the other person is willing to give it in the first place. And at this point, you know, the daughter isn't willing. Durgal's daughter isn't willing to give it, and doesn't forgive him for what's done, and may never. Well, I believe that like fundamentally, I think that Brandon does hold that belief that like true forgiveness is not real in that way. I don't think that impacts here.
And I do want to like not necessarily correct you, but push on you a little bit. He specifically like there is a distinction made between forgiveness and redemption, and he doesn't seem to, based on what I've picked up from what you've shared with me. Mm-hmm. His issue seems to be with redemption as opposed to forgiveness. In those moments,
yeah.
This feels like a shift from that. This feels like a either overcoming that thought process or changing that thought process or something. There is the thing that potentially he gets to hide behind, saying that like it's not the same person. Effectively,
that's interesting. I don't want to try to get into that weeds too much, because I don't think that applies as much. But I do think that the one thing that stands out to me, like he doesn't even call this redemption. He calls it change, which is fascinating. He doesn't try to make it about redemption necessarily, because I think he's equating that to something else potentially, or like leaving that on the table. But the other part of this that I wouldn't ascribe to Brandon's philosophy is that I would ascribe it to Wax's. So like, mm-hmm. Brandon may not agree with Wax's perception on, we'll call it redemption, on change this way, but Wax does. Wax fundamentally believes in it and believes in that ability for his friend to change, and so like he espouses it, and so Brandon may not, but the character does.
Yeah, I mean, however it goes in reality, I don't really care. I felt like this was a great conversation, and I agreed with it wholeheartedly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that the only thing that doesn't jive with me is that I believe Wax says that like you can't earn forgiveness, and I think you can earn forgiveness as long as someone is willing to give it. Like it's still there's no amount of acts that you can do that will just suddenly manifest forgiveness by any means. Like that's definitely, I agree with Wax on that. But I think on the front of being forgiven, it is ultimately always in the other party's power, the offended party's power, to forgive. And some people, that is like earning it in a lot of ways. It can be, you know, making up for it in any number of ways, like showing up a bunch to things when you were late to things. You know, like that's a stupid example, but point being. Yeah. I think absolutes around something like that are a little silly, which is also the reason that I push back against Brandon's personal take on that absolute, but it's all good. I really like the scene, though. I think that it works. And I think originally I actually didn't like it the first time that I heard it. And then I've had time. It's a little bit of separation. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. And then reapproaching it, I was like, you know what? I think that this works better than I thought it did. So, yeah.
Yeah, I felt like it worked really well.
Yeah. Wayne's a good man. I mean, as he's told, and you kind of see how this conversation like goes on. They keep bringing up examples from the past, talking about how Wax admires Wayne, burning down a school in their past, and how much he does care about the daughter of Durgal all these years later, and how he really didn't intend for that to be a cruelty to show up weekly. It was more his own flagellation, but he hadn't even thought about it. And he's finally kind of okay with all of this. He can finally let that go between his body and his mind, as he says. His body's moved on, but his mind hasn't. And so it's nice to see this kind of whole person be allowed to be united again.
Right. Totally.
I just made that one flow really naturally from
point to point. No,
so
you're good. You're good. Sorry. I think what I appreciate the most about this sort of section, or this topic, is that we saw that physical change before we saw the like mental one expressed explicitly. We saw him be able to use guns and start to like really sort of act the part before he realized that he's forgiven himself and he's moved on himself. His wound has healed, as Wax mentions. I liked that was the progression of it, the physicality before the mental.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also appreciate that. It's like he failed to recognize it. It's also so interesting because I think that it's not. No, it is in this chapter. For some reason, I thought it was in a later one. That like he is coming to the terms with the fact too that like despite inhabiting all of these different people, wearing all these different hats, becoming these things, that he's still like fundamentally misses the point of a lot of people. And I find that fascinating in conjunction with like his body and mind being also kind of separated in that way, in the way that they react to things. Like, because he's worn all these hats, that's part of the fragmentation, I'm sure, and part of the reason that it's buried, and he didn't recognize that he was able to move on or willing to. Yeah, there's a lot there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty good. This chapter is heavy, but I think it's nice to intro here and then outro when we do. So,
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, get a little bit of introspection before all of the action, a break, as it were, that we had last week. So, I also love that we get to spend the time to inspect this package from Steris as well, and that Wayne really does make it a point that he's come around to her in general. But he says something that I find fascinating shortly after giving this love to Steris. I was talking about this a little bit ago. I'm wrong with people a lot. I'm wrong about people a lot. Maybe even myself. This is just so fascinating because he is built so strangely around all these people, and like this sort of recognition of like what people are and who they are, but to be so fundamentally off in theory is just so interesting as an artifice for a character of whom is nothing but, kind of a blank slate to be written upon, or treats himself almost like a blank slate to be written upon.
So my takeaway on this, first of all, yes, great. Perfect thing to dig in on. But my takeaway on that is that like the way you present yourself and the way that you are outwardly show who you are doesn't necessarily reflect who you are truly. Like Wayne can perfectly imitate how somebody outwardly presents themselves to the point where he can be mistaken for them. But that doesn't mean he gets them. It doesn't mean that he knows them inside and out. He just knows them out.
Right. Yeah. He's not able to get into their heads. He just gets their skin.
Yeah. Which, I mean, that's the biggest organ, like it's important.
Motherfucker. I mean, sure. All right. I love that after all of this too, all of this wonderful conversation that happens around this, I do find it interesting that like not a whole lot of time is spent on that idea. It's just kind of brought up in this way, and so that's why I really enjoy digging in on it, because it is like, man, it is like the meaty bit of Wayne at this point. And this we've reflected on it a couple of times. This is kind of Wayne's book from the feeling from the outset. It's all three of their books. It's their send off in a big way, but it does feel more like Wayne's book than Wax's book. So it's almost strange that I think that we don't get more reflection on this from his perspective. But right. Neither here nor there. We can still talk about it, and that's great. So,
hey.
I don't know why I just sipped my whiskey, but I did. Oh, I know why, because we're about to talk about the Shaw. I love that after all of this, we get the callback to the story in the prologue and how they've now arrived at the Mesa. And of course, the Shaw is back in a new form as a towering skyscraper. I do find it interesting and like also so boldly ignorant to harken back to something that was evocative of slavery of this last generation to like kind of make it this whole thing. But then again, that is kind of what autonomy is about and what what they would be doing is sort of this. I mean, people are really great at imitating, right? So like that's kind of the whole thing is we imitate what we know. That's okay. But she's also like bold enough to kind of be hypocritical in this whole thing. So yeah, I don't know. What'd you make of the return of the Shah, as it were?
I mean, it's been 300 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
More or less 300 years ago, there are statues of people from 300 years ago that are still erected in this country today that stand for horrible, despicable things. So I don't think it's that far off that this could conceivably happen on that world.
Definitely not. You're right. That is valid.
But yeah, you already took your drink, but here.
Oh yeah. Cheers. Yeah, I find it interesting. And I mean, like, the Shah itself looks really cool on the outset, like, as, like, this depicted skyscraper. And I get it, especially because it is evocative of that same imagery. This is one that I don't think is cheap. Like, this is fine. Again, like, this is a great example of what we were talking about at the beginning. Okay, no problem with this. Totally makes sense.
I mean, because it's drawing upon the building itself. It's not drawing upon a very specific part of the story and referencing it as it's happening. Like those are two different things, I'd say.
Yeah. I would agree with that. There is a part of me, though, because there's that line later that happens with Marasi and Introne when they're in the basement about like why they brought the portal for autonomy there, or the item for autonomy, that I can't help but wonder if this is the actual like original location of where Creedic Shaw was, and therefore where the portal was. And so that's part of the reason that like all of this lines up. Not that it is where the Well of Ascension is, but I feel like there's something kind of saucy being played around with in the background here. It could just be the concentration of all the Allomancers, but I don't know about that.
That feels fucky. That feels really weird.
Does it? Oh, just that. Oh, I thought you were saying my theory.
That
feels
as an
fucky.
explanation of like having just a concentration of Allomancers there.
Oh yeah.
That feels weird. I don't like that.
It's a concentration of investiture or invested entities. I mean, I can understand, but like I don't know that I like it as an explanation. Maybe that's the reality, is that it could be enough. But you would think that it would also be them like burning their powers, right, or using their powers to like make it a component of it, so that it would be it more heavily. I don't know. Yeah, I'm with you. It feels a little fucky. I think I could be okay with it with a little bit of explanation, but I prefer this headcanon idea of like, what if this is where that was? What if this is where Creedic Shaw really was? And it isn't just evocative, it's kind of literal, especially given the importance to Era 1 and all of the rest of that. It being a hub of power, it's clearly evocative of power, which is why they're imitating it.
Every time Crossland says evocative.
God damn it. I'm going to say evocative so much in this episode, because it is very reminiscent of Era 1. Oh. What do you make of the Mesa comparison, though? Again, harkening back to the story from the prologue. And the idea of, like, the blatant Mesa being, like, the Mesa is the guy, blatant Barnes, or, you know, what would you...
So, I want something more concrete there. I think we have the sort of idea of the ash falls as kind of an environmental danger.
Sure.
But I don't feel like we have enough there other than like the people themselves, which is what Wax is kind of getting at. I don't love that. I don't know. I can see it. I get it. I want more. I want something more concrete before really taking a stance on it, I guess.
Sure. That makes sense. Again, I don't know if I'm not sure if it's something that we'll ever get something very concrete on, but as it is,
That's fair.
I mean, we've got one more, week, but fair enough.
And then 600 more years or something.
Yeah, depending on how long it takes to go to the next era, right? Part of me genuinely, we're not at the end yet. I'm not going to open up that can of worms. Not that it's that big of a deal, but at the very least, being at the conclusion is a good way to start talking about the future. So
fair enough.
We'll just wait for that. But we are also introduced to the big gun. And I gotta say, like, I remember at Dragonsteel when we were walking around, when we were in line, we were in separate lines for a while because I was in the VIP line and you were in the standard line. And we both made it around to seeing like the depiction of Wax and this giant cardboard cutout that you're like meant to pose with. And I think you had texted me like, is that Vindication? And I was like, I guess. Like, I don't know. What else? What the fuck else could it be? And I was like, because everything was very cartoonish in the style. And like, I liked the look and the aesthetic that they were going for. But I was like, that's a cartoonishly big gun.
Yep.
And well, it turns out there was a fucking reason for that.
It's a fucking big gun.
I remember we were just so critical of that image. I got the stickers here, so I'm showing PJ the thing. I'll post a link at the very least in our description so that you can go check out what I'm talking about, or tweet it and put it on Instagram, whatever. I was so relieved when I found out about the big gun. And I was like, okay, so it's not quite as cartoonish as I thought it was, but yeah. I just want to talk about it. It's comically big, but
it's comically big, but also still one-handed, apparently, by that sketch.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's, man, he's got some forearms, dude.
Yeah.
How hard do you think he could jack it?
For the record, there's a stock on it, so it looks like it is technically a two-hand. Yeah, there's a stock on the back. It kind of looks like a one-hander, but it does have a little stock on the bottom.
Now. Okay.
It blends in with his coat, so I don't blame you. Now I see it. Yeah, I didn't see it at first, and I was like, oh my god, I think you're right. And then I saw it, and I was like, oh, no, never mind. It does have a rifle stock at the very least. Stock or no stock, Wax jacks it. There is the question...
All right.
Again, we're going into Mistborn After Dark.
Being a coin shot, do you think there's like a gear system and like a mechanical cock ring that he can like manipulate with his steel pushing?
Okay.
That like a mechanical vibrating cock ring?
That is pretty much where I was going. I was thinking about piercings and like... So we'll let the mind wander with that after the cock ring, because the cock ring was enough. Oh my god. So out of left field. The final notes of this chapter after the cock ring commentary, before they don't talk about cock rings, of course not. Again, adjacent to YA here.
If they did.
Probably. Anyway, I'm so sorry if you're playing this out of an Alexa with anyone else who doesn't know what we're talking about nearby. Yep.
I'm not sorry.
I'm not sorry.
We warned you.
Yeah, we did. At the very top of the episode, we do give you a warning every time. We love you dearly.
And I didn't even obfuscate that warning this time.
Okay, so the final notes of this chapter before they take off are again somber ones. We reflect on Wayne being the one who finally broke Wax out of his trance and being this great friend after the death of Lessie and Alloy of Law, and how ever since Wayne reattached to Wax, it's also been like his entire life has been about how this one murder defines him, at the same time as he's just murdered a lot of people over the course of the story. So there's this interesting dichotomy of thoughts there within Wayne internally thinking about that, but then also the fact that Wax doesn't believe that he would have made it here without Wayne. So what do you make of the way that this wraps?
I mean, it's fucking heavy, of course. Yeah. But at the same time, there are some comments throughout this section that make me feel like Wayne is also not quite as directly, but also like a minor sort of harmony to a certain degree. Like, he gets those vials of metals just like Wax had. I believe one of which had a red cap, similar to what Wax had in that pack from Steris.
Oh, yeah, the red cap one. Yep.
Yeah. So, like, he's also getting imbued with shit from Harmony somehow.
Okay.
Like, it feels like he's transcended, similar to Wax, beyond just a person doing extraordinary work. Like, it feels like he's being pulled into this fold of the hand of God to a certain degree.
Yeah, kind of like he's a shield or something else, right? Doesn't he say that later?
He does say that.
Yeah. Yeah, if Wax is the sword, he's the shield. I think that's when he saves the people right after the murder apocalypse. But yeah, so by hand of God, do you mean give me just a little bit more on that?
Like I think there's something. Yeah. Well, we know textually that there's something extraordinary happening.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it's through the metals themselves. Mm-hmm. Wax seems to believe that. Harmony seems to respond to it, saying that it was something, but it didn't work like he was intending. But there was something there.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
So, like, whatever's happening outside of their normal abilities. Specifically, what I'm talking about is the scene coming up pretty soon. I can't remember exactly where it is, but where they is it Scary Tree? I think is the code word for the plan.
Yeah, but I think that's for the miscoat. Yeah.
Yeah, he is riddled with holes and never got shot. Like the miscoat it has like 16 holes in it. And his explanation is just I wasn't where the bullets were. But like that feels like there's something more to it than that, and we're just missing information.
Sure. Okay. Part of me believes that some of the Scary Tree bit was like basically like putting it on a tree or like making it seem like it was something when it isn't, but maybe it wasn't. So we'll get there and we'll talk about it when we get there.
Okay.
But yeah. Okay, with that closes out our first chapter. So we move into chapter 59. And oh man, we move to Maricy's first chapter of the week, and it is fantastic. She makes her way with the help of the survivors into Introne's home, blows the door open, and is quickly caught by Introne himself, although she does manage to escape a slowness bubble that separates them. In something that feels so clearly evocative of like the Star Wars Phantom Menace scene with Darth Maul between the lasers. It feels like they're just pacing and looking at each other and having this conversation, but including some of that conversation and pacing and patience and whatnot before they get to face off. What'd you make of her questions and also like the general tone of Introne in the scene and the way that his stance kind of feels? It's so interesting, especially some of the survivor stuff that he brings up. What do you make?
Yeah, she gets so fucking lucky throughout this scene in this entire chapter. So I'm honestly kind of glad, just from a storytelling's perspective, that Introne noticed that the radio was on when he first started talking, and he like heard his echo outside, and is able to like effectively just turn it off and like foil that part of the plan. Like it just ratchets up the stakes a little bit more, and it doesn't feel like she is just winning through like she has an adversary because she doesn't win everything that she tries to do. Like that,
right?
I don't know the best way to describe it. Does that track though?
Good. I totally get it. Yeah, it makes it so that it isn't just win, and it gives something back where it's like, ah, shit, I was foiled a little bit. It does reset those stakes and increases the tension in the scene. So I'm totally with you there.
Introne is obviously a slimy garbage person, but at least here I can track his reasoning, and like he has a rationale that makes sense that I can like follow. And like there are conceits that have to be made in order to put yourself into a position where you can believe those, but they're not outside of the realm of believability. It's not just evil. It's I feel like I'm trapped in a corner, and out of my own preservation, out of my own need to survive, like he talks about, this is my path forward. Like it sucks, and I can't get behind it, but I get it, which felt really good.
I think so. I think that's why this becomes a rewarding character kind of in the 11th hour, right? Otherwise, he is just kind of a slimy dirtbag. And I don't think that this really fundamentally makes him any less of a slimy dirtbag, but at the very least, we can understand the motivation there. And at the very least, if not empathize, sympathize with the understanding. So like if you feel like it's the only path out and like it does feel like he's just gone too deep and he can't get out. And especially given kind of the circumstances of everything, it's like, I really can't get out now. He doubled down on the wrong people. So, it's reasonable that he gets taken down for it, but at least I understand his motivations. So
exactly. Like I don't feel bad for him, but I get it.
Yeah. I mean, by comparison, or just for comparison within the same series, I feel like the approach from Miles 100 Lives feels very similar, but I don't feel like he has as clear of motivations as Entrone does. In this, I would have liked for a little bit more. Yeah, exactly. I would have liked for a little bit more clarity like this from Miles. So, yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. Totally a thing. But I love the conversation that happens here. I love the tension. It is absolutely wonderful the way that they basically play tennis through this time slow bubble. It's great. So we also briefly see the portal through here, so we know that that's coming up. I just want to bring that up here, since that technically happens inside of the chapter. So we know that this play is a play for Marasi, so that she can, get to the other side, so that she can try to free the people, so that she can try to take care of the portal.
Yeah, it gives some reasoning behind like why there's this ostentatious palace in the middle of this town. Like, oh, it's a facade for this portal. This is the point, I believe, where Entrone also talks about bringing in some glowing power source, I believe.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Are we I'm racking my brain. I feel like I should know what this is talking about. Are we supposed to? Is it the...
I don't think we're supposed to know. If I were to try to work this out in things that we know, my closest assumption would be that it is an amount of metal of autonomy that would make it so that a portal could be formed, meaning a big portion of autonomy's body to create a perpendicularity. How to get there? That's a massive question.
But glowing?
I mean, why not?
Because Trellium's red. I'd assume it's the same metal as Trellium. And maybe I shouldn't.
Oh.
We know what that metal looks like.
Could, hypothetically, given the circumstances, could Trellium be a hybrid metal?
Maybe.
Because we know that Trell isn't the real name of Harmony, or not of Harmony, of autonomy. It's Bavidium, or Bavidin. I don't fucking remember. I think it's right. Bavidin. I was hoping that I would just stumble it until you agreed with me, but there we go. Yeah, it is Bavidin. That's what it is. I have to think, to me, that silver is, or rather the glowing metal is probably the core metal, and then we're dealing with an alloy that is actually Trellium. Could not be the case, but I can't think of another thing.
What is the thing that Kelsier steals from the Elantrians in Secret History?
From the Irie, yes, he steals the... Oh my god, what is it called?
I thought it was a glowing something that was kept in a burlap sack of some sort.
Yeah, it's a ball that's meant to capture the power, to hold the power of a shard. I guess It could be that. But I think it's to hold the whole shard, not just the power of a shard.
Could it be used for multiple things?
It could be. Yeah.
Could be used
we get
to
so
create
little
a
on it
perpendicularity.
Yeah.
Because it also, here's the other thing, is that it just being in its proximity produces the power to fuel all of the metals later on. So is it door effectively?
So I don't think it's door. This is a lot of speculation. I don't think it's door, right? I feel like it's got to be connected with autonomy in order for this to work, because they're coming from another planet that autonomy is invested in. And so I think for this to be a perpendicularity from A to B, that feels right to me. It might not be. It could be the door. It could be any number of things. So I would lean towards the orb or the metal first.
If it is a metal specific to Bavidin, I don't understand how that could fuel all of the other Metalborn's powers.
Well, I think that... So here's the thing. I think that the portal being opened is one component of this. I think the metal is used to open the portal to begin with, the perpendicularity, as it were, right?
Okay.
And then to consume... They're just consuming the raw investiture, which we know that shards are raw... the bodies of shards are raw investiture, as we understand it. The door is. So hack off a piece of your body turn it into a door, basically.
Yeah. Okay.
Assumption.
The door previously was not described as glowing, so...
The door glows. The jars of door glow. Yeah.
Did they? Okay.
Yep. They glow.
Never mind.
Yeah.
That's my current theory that I'm sticking to, is that it was door.
See, I feel like that's I feel like that's the thread that he wants you to latch in on, is believing that it is door. It's investiture regardless, but I don't think it's specifically door. That's why I'm of the opinion that I think that it's not door, and it's got to be something else related. I think
you sound
to
like
autonomy.
Me.
I know. I have a little bit more info, and so
fine.
I am kind of leaning on that a little bit. I don't have a perfect answer, though, still with all of that other info, which is my point. I'm also not bringing any of that into this. I'm just trying to communicate in ideas. But given my, notch up or two on the rest of the series from the Stormlight Archive, that's my belief. But it could be door. That's the other part of this, is it just fucking could be. So, you know. Speculation Hour 101. Here we are.
Fair enough.
Welcome to Words and Whiskey, WKON, Speculation Hour. I am your host, Crossland Shaw, and I have no friends.
That's only mostly true.
Yeah. I mean, fair. What do you think of the useless power conversation that goes on again regarding Marcy and her capabilities here? Like
the idea that power is only useful if if everybody doesn't die, basically.
No, I really mean that, he calls her power useless in addition to, calling her a bastard and a bunch of other things, right? Literally her power that she has as a... God, what do they call it? She's not a slider. She's the other one. Yeah.
Fuck.
So it's cadmium. Pulsar.
Yep. Well, I mean... It feels weird. It feels weird for that to be brought up, because it either means he is completely unaware of the technology that they've gained access to and have kind of started to build technology around, build their world around, or he's just trying to get into her head somehow, which might be kind of effective with the rioting going on.
Well, a little bit later. We're not there yet.
That's later. Yep. Okay.
It's about to happen, but
yeah. So it just felt like grasping at straws more than anything. Sure. Of she knows, she understands where her use lies. It's not as inherently internally useful, but there are technologies within this world that they have access to that makes her powers incredibly useful.
Mm-hmm.
But even before that, she found uses for it and saved the day with unconventional uses of her power. I don't get where he's going at with that. I think it's just him trying to get into her head.
Entirely, yeah. I think it's an ego. He's trying to play into that ego. But I think what's so great is that, especially if we consider Marcy's arc, this feels and getting into kind of the next chapter and some of the stuff that happens there too, this feels like ultimately a payoff for her turning down power and turning down these capabilities. And she's like, I am more than the utility of what I was born with. And I think that's so great. And your perceived value of me as such, that's awesome, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I really love that from her perspective.
So do I.
Yeah. So for me, that's where I see this resolving, right? Not that she really comes to that conclusion, but I think that we can draw that that's how she got here, especially after the last book and being given the powers of Vin, and the way that we do eventually get there in the form of as soon as this goes on, she's like, the power isn't the power of me, it's the power of the people. As a member of the law, it's not about me being powerful. It's about the fact that people vest their power in me and belief in me to do the right thing. So
right.
Love that. I know that we're not quite there yet, but it's one of my favorite parts of the book, is I think it's really well written, that front. So Intron quickly blitzes through a wall, though, which is just kind of a shock of a moment when he just runs through one of them and around the slowness bubble, grabs her and holds her aloft. But Marcy gets the comeback here. She knows what her strength is, and her cousin shows up, Armel, and unleashes a pure, incredibly powerful writing, siphoning some of the door to create this effect in the moment, and really like just so cool the way that this chapter ends.
I mean, what a fucking burst of sudden action.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty great way to end the chapter.
Yeah.
End the 50s.
End the 50s, as it were.
Yeah.
Yes, good call. And we exit the 50s, and we enter this. Oh, yeah.
Well, so I just wanted to take a step back to the previous question a little bit, talking about useless powers and their perception as stuff, or as such. She has such, just because I want to make us drink, she has such a different and more healthy outlook on herself and her powers and their usefulness and whether or not that defines who she is than Spook did through most of Era 1. We don't see any tin eyes throughout Era 2, as far as I can recall.
One that I believe it's in Shadows of Self, when they're chasing down the car that works for the taxi company.
Oh,
He's
yes.
a tin eye. Because he can key into things from a long distance and then relays them. But that's
maybe.
it. Like, it's no... She... Yeah.
I think
that
it's a
character. Yeah.
But either way, like, his whole thing was that
Wonderful
he had
point.
a useless ability and really dragged himself down for it through most of Era 1.
Mm-hmm.
And then redeemed himself by being given other powers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like, that's not how you redeem somebody,
right?
And like prove that they're not useless by giving them external superpowers. God,
yeah. By comparison, this is like, in my head, this is the correct way to have handled it to begin with. Like, this is entirely the way that Spook's arc should have been handled, right? Like, she doesn't need all of those powers. Cheers. And that's a great point. Honestly, I hadn't thought of that parallel. Yeah. Honestly, that's killer because it is the same problem in the beginning, kind of, and then she comes out on the other side of that completely and doesn't need additional powers in order to be who she is or who she wants to be, and isn't just spontaneously given them. But there's still time, PJ. So
that's true. It could happen.
Oh man. What a thematic disaster that would be after having this long conversation about it. Just be like, oh, and by the way,
you get a Mistborn and you get a Mistborn.
Yeah. Harmony's just giving those out, apparently. Not that he actually is, but you know.
You get a nugget and you get a nugget. Everybody gets a nugget.
Everybody gets a nugget. You want my nuggies. Okay, with that, we go into chapter 60. And wow, we move into this chapter, and this whole next thing just feels incredible. This is the resolution of the previous chapter. We've talked about missing emotional allomancy inside of this story, and the fact that it hasn't been featured much. And it's incredible to have that back in the story, especially with how much Sanderson's writing has improved, book to book to book. It's a blast, a wave, and she feels absolutely suppressed by this rioting. And like the tug on her emotions feels like she's almost being pulled into a well, but she's just crawling on the ground. You know what I mean? It feels like something out of Hercules where she's like trying to swim her way out of hell, but she's just crawling on the ground. And I just love that she has such a hard time shaking it off, but she does manage to shake it off because she knows who she is. Like we were talking about before, she has this confidence. She knows that she's not useless. But Introne, meanwhile, lacks that same confidence and instead is wearing a facade and is given those things artificially by other people and other means and is therefore a lesser character.
Yeah.
Like
Cheers. I'm going to do it to you.
Kidding,
like in this answer. I really fucking loved the description of how the rioting took hold here. Mm-hmm. and how it affected Marasi. And I don't know if it's one or the other or both. My assumption is that it's both. But if it's just Branderson's ability to write these things, or the fact that we haven't really inhabited the mind of somebody that wasn't a Mistborn during a really effective bout of emotional allomancy. Like
that's true.
The biggest comparison that I have here isn't Breeze, but anytime the Lord Ruler stepped foot in the area, it was that really, really oppressive, just emo vibe. And that's really the extent of how it was described. You didn't get the specifics. You didn't get the rushing thoughts that would naturally come to take hold of you as the way it's described here. Like, I loved this. The doubt and the self-doubt manifest.
The loathing.
And just spiraling thoughts. We don't get that in Era 1. And obviously we don't get any of that throughout most of Era 2 because there hasn't been emotional allomancers featured.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think there's only like 2 cases in which we have any emotional allomancy, and I think it's the mention of it, again, with the cabbie, like them influencing people to like make them make car trips or not make car trips or what have you. And then
the party.
When Marsh... The party. There is some in the party. There's also when Marsh walks into the room, he is soothing, sort of seemingly a little bit casually to everyone that's in there.
On like aluminum foil hats as a counter to emotional allomancy. So like we know it exists. We just don't get any firsthand accounts with it, like firsthand emotional like commentary on it.
Yeah, right, totally. And that's the other side of this. Is I think, to your point, the last time that we even had like a powerful rioting be depicted was the Lord Ruler like walking around in general. I'm not even positive if that was a soothing. Yeah, it must have been a soothing. It could have been rioting, but like I think that this is the first time that this has really strongly happened. We know Alriandre, your least favorite character is, again, we're taking another drink because we're bringing this back up into that, was a rioter, and we did see some of those moments from Breeze's perspective, but nothing like this.
Yeah. We got really cool moments from Breeze effectively rioting people through soothing.
Yep.
Which was super cool, but
yeah.
Yeah.
But rarely on the other side of it too. That's the other side. Like, not just like that's Breeze exerting something. This is being exerted upon. Yeah. And how that would impact you. So I love it. It's great.
I did too.
Yeah.
More of this, please, Branderson.
More, please. I have to imagine, if I'm imagining Era 3, I think if we're going spy thriller, we're going to be playing with emotional allomancy leads. I think. I would love that.
God, you could make a case for so many of them, though.
You could, but I feel like emotional allomancy as like a social tool is so useful, and that would be such a good thing for a spy to have.
That would be.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder
Not
if
that other ones would, but
would you bring back Mistborn?
I don't know. Maybe you might have to have them be on an even playing field with technology improving. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, or another like really, really aggressive Twinborn.
Yeah, right. Twinborn combos that could be crazy.
Yeah,
sounds like a subreddit. Twinborn combos that are crazy. OP Twinborn. I don't know.
OP Twinborn.
Like yeah. Okay, so they managed to leech away Intron's powers, but they realize that they still have to fully contend with this. And we get our second era callback. Not really, I mean, but there have been like, I think a couple of them, but I mean, there's just so many. And I feel like this one is particularly leading our emotions in the form of the powerful riot like the Lord Ruler would be capable of. That comparison, it just, not that it's wrong. It's not that it's incorrect. It's that we can draw that conclusion without bringing the Lord Ruler into the equation.
Yeah.
I think. And we were capable of it. But now it's time for us to deal with that pool, just like the last Emperor Elend did before. So like in the span of 2 pages, we go from like talking about the Lord Ruler to talking about the fucking Elend again. And it's like, you're not wrong. None of this is wrong. But too much, too quick, too condensed.
It's so much. But this is that point where like, I don't know if you can solve this problem without referencing that answer. You know,
I think,
like what would point you to trying to like? I feel like it would feel just as bad to not reference it and just go and start like burning it.
I don't think that's true. Like the idea of like dipping in and like touching it or like trying to do it and referencing it makes sense to me versus saying we have to do what Elend did. Like, so that's my problem is telling us as opposed to like trying and experimenting, and then the character having a flash of realization that it's like Elend is very different than being like, we have to go do what was already done, you know?
So frankly, I think my assumption is those allomantic grenades hold a lot. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like way more than people can. So I think if Marasi were to go and like inspect the pool or inspect the portal and the grenade accidentally touches it and it just diminishes the size of the pool immediately based on just the grenade touching it, that would trigger that memory of like, oh, it's like that. That would feel a lot better. To your point, I think you're right.
I also don't know that I would have issues with it if we didn't just talk about the Lord Ruler basically within a page. Like that's my other problem with it.
Yeah.
I'm okay with it, but there's so much of it in such a tight space that it's like, why aren't you just letting them live these moments and then make it feel like they're doing that? That's, again, I'm griping on this, I think, a little bit more than I intend to, but it is my number one complaint about this climax is it does latch on to Era 1 very tightly to try to wrap its emotional payoffs in it. Like a blanket, like a comforting blanket, because we know what that is. We know what those payoffs are. So, you know. And parallelism is fine. I'm totally down with these things resolving in a similar fashion and even harkening back and calling to them. But yeah, I have a little beef with the telling instead of showing that.
Yeah, I can get behind that.
Yeah. And the frequency with which it's told. I do want to clarify something maybe that is some like out of context stuff. The way that he wrote the end of this novel is he wrote them as 3 separate chunks and he just wrote it all together and then he went and spaced them out into each other. So you can see in his like progress blogs that he was talking about, he's like, in the end of the story, there's like, we have 3 POVs and they split up very distinctly. So I wrote them all independently and then stitched them together.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I'm assuming Wax and Wayne were probably written together and then split and figuring out how to, yeah.
And then Steris and Marasi.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, yeah, that's it. But, so you can see why this could become overburdened with the mentions on accident, especially if you aren't going through and doing a repass yourself. And it's like, we're talking minor gripe.
Yeah.
I want to make that very clear. I'm not like, this is not secret history bad by any stretch. And I know that not everyone agrees with me there, so that's fine. Or us there, at the very least. I'm glad that we had the same reaction to it at the very least, because it would have been a little weird otherwise.
Yeah. That's
so. All right.
I mean, that's the whole point, right? Like, you and I have similar tastes and similar outlooks on things. Like,
right.
It's natural.
Not identical, but similar. So,
but very similar. Yeah.
Right.
Like, that's why this podcast started. So,
yeah.
I don't think it should be that surprising.
Right. It's kind of the idea. Cool. All right. So I
guess my point is, if you disagree with us, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's A-okay. Like we just happen to jive really, really well together and like tend to hold similar opinions on things. But that doesn't mean we're 100% right. That doesn't mean we're the only opinion that can be held. It's just I think like,
what it
Yeah, I don't want this to become an echo chamber. But
yeah, we also aren't an authority. Like that's the other. Like we're not trying to act like some kind of almighty authority.
Far from authority. On
anything. we are not. We're not trying to be some authoritative voice. It's about entertainment. We hope you enjoy our trip through these things. We hope to add clarity to things that may have been confusing and like enhance the story in other ways for you, especially through PJ's perspective and an additional fine tooth comb on these things. Fine tooth comb.
Fine tooth.
Tooth is it's just a tooth comb. You could just fucking call it a floss, but
or
it's
a toothbrush.
Tooth comb. The comb like separates things though. That's like
your toothbrush doesn't.
The comb
separate
divides. No, floss does though.
I'm doing it wrong.
You got teeth problems, man.
That's
you
true.
should get that checked out. All right, with that, we get into chapter 61. Wax and Wayne fly through the air towards the Shah, jumping between skyscrapers, and Wayne's upset that they didn't launch through a window, all dramatic like Vin did back in the day. Again, calling back to that first book, explaining that Wayne knows all this because the book that he's read, Max, I think is great. And then anyway, he leans over to like look in and the gun cracks the window in almost described as the same fashion as when Vin did it. So it is kind of fun, and it was the right call to not just like jump in guns a-blazing. But like, again, this one I think you could have gotten away with because it's a well-executed joke, but because of the other ones,
just proximity, proximity and volume,
right?
Yeah,
yep.
Just to kind of break this down and go to the root of it. I know for a fact that there are other stories, and I'm sure there's a lot more than I'm aware of, that use previous books as a mythological or not source material for the new story. The one that comes to mind, obviously, to me, is the Silmarillion and the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings. But this seems to do it in a much more concise way. It's not more obvious. It's not more out there. Like, I don't know how to describe it, but like it feels clever in a lot of these moments. This one specifically. Are there others that stick out in your mind?
Other stories that stick out?
Other stories that do this?
I think the
like
form of base mythology.
I know we're ripping into just a lot of these because of the proximity and because of the sort of bluntness of how many of them are at once. But most of them, standing on their own, are done pretty well.
I love, for the record, I also love this idea of like building upon that mythos and like evolving it over time. That's part of the reason that I love like the comparison, especially if you bring up the Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and the Silmarillion, right? Is it's like this compounding thing where of course there are going to be references. And of course, when characters are raised with these books and things, it's not, we treat it like fiction, but it's their like foundational myths of the world. It's their religions. It's all this stuff. There are a number of series that do it. There's The Wheel of Time kind of does it in a different way. You explore it over the course of the, like, you don't start in the past and then like go there, but you kind of have like flashbacky builds that explain the past, if that makes sense. It makes sense in the context of the story because there's a unique kind of twist there. I don't want to ruin it for you, but that works. The Dark Tower has a similar kind of mythos. You don't get it until later in the series, but then you get it all at once and you're like, oh shit, the foundation myth and all these commentaries, that makes sense. You get it in, oh my God, one of my favorite examples is David Gemmel's Stormbreaker. The first two books are 300 years prior to the other two. And so it's like you have two books that set up the foundation of everything, and then you have the payoff. The series is called the Regante series. The first book, I believe, is Sword in the Storm. Yeah. Okay. So that's one of my favorite fantasy novels. But there are a lot that do this and do it well. To the extent, though, that like Brandon's going with pushing forward in ages, not that many. First Law does as well, I should say. I should clarify that. First Law is kind of that as well, but
okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Couple of examples, but like I totally jive with it. I love this idea because the characters should know these things. They should think of them because it's evocative in their own lives. It's the metaphors of everything around them. So like it makes sense for them to bring them up. It is literally just a proximity problem and a frequency, and in Maricy's case, a tell not show, but
it is what it is.
It is. It's still good. I like it. Yeah. But they decide to pull off the scary tree, and we get even more callbacks to Era 1 with the first use of coins as a killing weapon in the series to take down a couple of folks from Wax's perspective. He then does something similar with the lights before meeting back up with Wayne, giving him the coat back with a couple of holes in it. Just kind of
couple of holes in it. I think he says there's 16 of them. Like,
of course there's 16 of them.
It's fucking Swiss cheese. This is what I was talking about before. Like, there's not a further explanation. There's not anything more other than I dodged him. I don't fucking know. Explanation from Wayne. Like, that's all we really get. But it feels to me like there's more going on than what we see.
There definitely is. This is one of those things where, again, window dressing and like our understanding of what something is versus like seeing it all the time. Because we're in Wax's perspective. It'd be great in this moment to be in Wayne's. To that point, yeah, you did just drink for that because we did make mention of Arrow 1 again inside of this with all the callbacks and the coins. But I do find it funny, A, that there are that many holes, and then B, this is like a mist cloak style coat, right? And so like it has a bunch of tassels everywhere, and so that means that like where he got shot was like up higher in the cloak, kind of, you know what I mean? Like it's got to be above where the tassels are, because you would take off a tassel, you wouldn't put a hole in a tassel, probably, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
It'd be hard to count them.
Yeah, I guess the coat extends to about the waist in the official drawing, so yeah, I guess okay, fine, whatever.
Yeah,
fine. Okay, it can
like
have
a
holes.
duster.
It can have a bunch of holes.
It's like I imagine it like a duster that's been like halfway pushed through a paper shredder.
Basically, that is basically what it looks like. Yeah, that tracks.
Like you just dip your duster into the industrial paper shredder and then pull it back out.
How'd you feel about the coin callback?
It didn't strike me necessarily as something. They're referred to as coin shots constantly. Like that's a natural thing to just have on your person and use as a projectile. Like it didn't really strike me as a callback to Arrow 1. Maybe I missed some texts that made it more clear for some reason, but like that didn't really strike me.
I feel like I don't think that's an incorrect or improper reaction. Like it doesn't need to be striking all the time. I just found it interesting myself because I was like, if it's such an effective tool, why don't you use it more? Like that was my first thought. It was like, well, if it works so well, why aren't you doing this more consistently all the time? So yeah, that was more my bag at it. Like, because very clearly it was incredibly effective as he assassinated these folks. So
it's because he's always had bullet casings, and those aren't they're smaller and they're not like flat. They're not as wide. Like they can still do a lot of damage, but he was working with what he's always had. And coins, while maybe he had them, they're useful. And bullet casings aren't. So he'd naturally gravitate to using them first. But like a coin can do so much more damage than like a hollow bullet casing could.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely true. On the other side as well, obviously we've been fixating a little bit on the coin thing here. There's something to be said about him being a lawman as well. Like I'm countering my own point to some degree, but like because he is a lawman, like he never needs to silently take people out. It's always about addressing it, trying to bring it up to people, and then if he has to go loud, he goes loud. So why would you use coins when you have a gun that can shoot faster because you can push on them and you already get a head start? So there's that too, I guess, was kind of my core point.
Right. He likes being flashy.
He does like being flashy. That's for sure. To our Devil's Cut question, I wouldn't pick coins. I would definitely pick the watch over the coins or the stun ring. Anyway.
You can listen to that Devil's Cut at patreon.com/words and whiskey.
It didn't have to be an ad placement, PJ.
No, but you made it an ad placement.
Okay. Wax chooses to slip the earring back in to have a conversation with Telson where she calls him a frightened child, and they share the equivalent of a movie villain motivation speech between the two of them, kind of arguing back and forth. Maybe not a motivation speech, but kind of like the core of why I'm doing this, and you can't stop me, and this is why I've always done this. There's also the come and get me kind of moment at the end before he throws away that earring. What do you make this conversation between brother and sister in this chapter?
So this is the immediate continuation of the conversation from a couple weeks ago where Wax slipped away off the rooftop, right? Like, I don't think they've interacted since then.
Nope.
So she still doesn't seem to really grip how much he's changed. It felt like she's less ignorant now. Like it wasn't directed like she's dealing with a child that hasn't grown up, but more so she's relying now on history and shared experiences and understanding how she's always bested him in things, which felt, but she still doesn't seem to really have that grip of how much he's changed since then. I feel like this established communication technique, this remote communication, is the best way for this villain monologue to happen.
Yeah.
Like, it's the only way that it makes sense to me, because you don't have the opportunity for the protagonist to foil the villain's plan while they're talking. And you don't have the frustration of like, just fucking do it when you're looking at like what the villain's doing. Like, this is well planned. This is well executed. And I love that you can have these tropes done in a more effective way.
Absolutely. You want to talk about tropes? This is like the beginning of the scene that is basically, what if we escalated Die Hard with superpowers?
Yeah.
And like, this is effectively the walkie-talkie between Hans and Bruce Willis's character, right? Like,
exactly.
This is, yeah. So I'm totally down with it, and I love it, and it totally works because it's not just espousing it directly in front of someone. When it's like, why don't you blow their face off? Like, you could end this right now, but it works in a similar way, and the other Die Hard works in a similar way because there's a distance to it, but the communication's still effective. So you did say somewhere in there that like she's bringing up the fact that like, you know, not dealing with a child anymore, and PJ, I'm not gonna lie, I was having a hard time not laughing hysterically because comparatively you look like a child right now for me. So I wanted to rub that sick burn in, and I got a sick delay on that joke. So now it's not nearly as funny and is instead just mean and hurtful.
It's fine. You're right. Kaylin said I look like I'm 23 again.
That's funny.
Yeah. For those of you who haven't listened to the Devil's Cut, we're not going to explain it. You can go listen at patreon.com/Where's the Whiskey.
God damn it. You did 2 in a row. All right. We really appreciate that support, of course. But no, I really do like this moment. I think that it works brilliantly across the board. Like, I think I couldn't have said it better, especially as you said it. So like, no comment. You just hit it. Sometimes you just do it, right? But if you thought the movie analogies were going to stop, I got like 4 more in the next 2 chapters.
They're all Die
Hard. Of chapters. No, they're not all Die Hard. I didn't even put Die Hard in the notes. I just thought about it for a second. I was like, oh yeah, it is kind of like Nakatomi Plaza and like going upwards and then scaling the building and then having the confrontation on the roof, and yeah,
Hans Gruber falling to his death, but that doesn't actually happen. I just thought it did.
Right. I did too, again, for some reason. I got tricked by the end, and then I realized what it was. We'll talk about that when we get there. But he tears out the earring, throws it away, and says that it's time for the sword to do his job. And oh man, is it fucking time.
Brutal shit to come, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I know.
I don't think there's any doubt. Well, yeah,
I think.
Yeah, right. At this point, it's kind of a flinch. It's nice. All right, with that, we go into chapter 62. And wow, does the sword start strong. He starts with a fire extinguisher and kind of creating a cloud of smoke for him to wander around. And then we honestly get one of the coolest scenes in the entire series. His big gun, a massive shrapnel cannon, of course, is what we find out. It's meant for him to be manipulated, not necessarily just to kill, like shooting it directly at someone, but instead to like give outlines to show where everyone is in a room to wound so that he can kill, so that he can go through and clean out a full room. And he just kind of becomes an embodiment of death. It's crazy just as he kind of like stalks through these rooms, murdering everyone and creating a wall of metal in front of him, as well as he describes it, right? So he's like just shoving around and directing this wall as he embraces the other side of the Pathian virtue that we don't often talk about, of course, as a part of Harmony, is that side of ruin.
Yeah. So this is what I talked about at the beginning of the episode, this scene where all I could think about is Zane and Vin going through Set's headquarters, through his mansion. What would it be called? Because that space, but it's not his stronghold.
Sure, yeah.
Sure, whatever. Like that's all I was thinking about through this, was how similar that was in feeling and in execution and in brutality. Yeah. So
yeah,
I'm drinking
absolutely.
for that. I don't know if we already did, but
fair. Cheers. I am become death, Waxilium Ladrian, as it were. So I really love this scene, of course, because it's not only like just brilliantly written action. I feel like you can see it and feel how it's depicted in the way that he's kind of swinging around this wall. But he also destroys the staircase and carves his way through everyone in his path. And it feels so evocative of the Matrix elevator scene to me. Like that was my first thought in the way that a lot of this goes. And it's just great. We hear the groans and Wax. I said evocative, didn't I? That's why you fucking cheers me. I didn't understand and I did it. Oh no! Okay, so it's reminiscent of the scene in the Matrix. But we hear the groans and Wax asks Harmony that he never be made to do this again, and we see a flashback to Arrow 1 and says it in the streets among the ruins in Ellendale, saying basically saying that he's been there. I don't think that he actually says anything. It's just meant to depict the fact that he understands what Wax is going through in that kind of image in his head and the way that he feels. And he's acknowledging it and saying, yes, I get it.
Yeah,
but he also doesn't want to go back.
That's the response to, you don't know how this feels. It's like, nope, here you go.
Mm-hmm. Here's my feelings. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's the best response that could be in that situation. He doesn't have much of a choice. He's not able to directly talk to him. Mm-hmm. I'm surprised he's able to imprint that scene. Like that feels like a stretch of the abilities based on how we've been able to understand them. You know?
Right, totally. Yeah.
So I don't know what to make of that. Like that feels even more complicated than just directly talking.
To like place the image? Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't think that it's a stretch of the power or anything like that is like untenable. Because I think doesn't Ruin also put an image in Vin's head of the end of the world? Or no, sorry. Preservation does it to Kelsier, never mind. Fuck Secret History. Sorry, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess to your point, like we don't really see Yeah. I don't know. I like it. Again, it's because it's evocative of Arrow 1, not because it's telling us. Like it's that. God damn it! I said it again. Fuck. It's a reminder of what came before, as opposed to something that's very blatant. I think it's great.
Yeah, I like it. I balked a little bit at the mechanics of why that was allowed to happen.
I feel like we get the explanation though, that like the idea is that preservation can provide things to the head, Ruin can provide things to the mind, and preservation can hear the mind's thoughts, right? So why wouldn't he be able to push a picture?
Yeah, but not audio.
He probably could have pushed audio.
Okay. But he never did before? Until
I have
until
the
he
answer,
put in
unfortunately. So
okay,
I know.
All right, fine. Let's just
This is one of those moments where I'm like, I'm sorry.
Fine. All right. Let's keep going then. Am I fair to have that feeling?
I think it's fair.
Okay. Like I know I get latched onto things where like the answer's right there and I just ignored it and like I'm wrong. But I'll keep like diving in. So as long as this isn't one of those, I'm cool with it. But like if I should understand that this is possible, just let me know.
I will totally let you know if that were the case. Yeah, I'm never like, I'm not going to tell you what and why, of course, but I'm always going to let you like not
be
trapped. All right. At the very least in Brandon Sanderson stuff. In everywhere else, I might just be mysterious and cryptic. So everything has an explanation here versus another shit I can be like, yes, excellent. So Wax is ready to launch into the next room, but Wayne manages to talk him out of it as he's pretty sure they're just standard guards. The chapter ends with him shouting to them. We get to that almost immediately in the next chapter, but what do you make of this like call of Wayne's to try to not kill more people?
I mean, it's a pretty fucking good call.
Yeah.
What I wonder is how many other people would have actually been able to stop Wax in his tracks like this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I feel like Wayne is one of the only people that would have been able to do it. Steris maybe at this point could have. She'd never be in this situation though. So like it to get Wax to take another approach after this insane, just
killing
torrent of death.
Yeah.
Says a lot about his relationship with Wayne.
It also says a lot about the way that Wayne's changed. It's like a physical acknowledgement of the fact that like Wayne didn't like killing to begin with, and he's like always lived with that. In this moment, he's like, part of being close to you has been the killing, and so now I need to stop because I am cognizant of this, and my body and mind can act together to be like, I think we can do better, especially because I think these people don't want to be here. And that's great. I think it's a great payoff moment of Wayne's change as well.
Yeah, I agree.
It exemplifies the best parts of Wayne.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so with that, we go into chapter 63. We've already started talking about this, of course, because this is kind of some of the payoff that we get from 62, but I love that he convinces all of the people to leave. This is one of those things that, like, I love The Matrix. I adore the movie. I think it's great. I think Neo, the character, given, I don't want to go into, like, the reason that he didn't is because everyone in The Matrix is fake anyway, and that's why like shooting them is fine in the moment. But I feel like Neo, the character, would have done the same thing that Wax or that Wayne did in this moment of like being like, hey, if you're not like into this, get out. And I believe Neo would have done the same thing. So it's very reminiscent of that to me. That's like where my parallel ends to some degree. But I really enjoy that it is his desire to do the right thing and save lives here that like just shines through. And I love that for Wayne.
For sure. I absolutely love the mental place that Wayne is at in this section, and here specifically. Like, it is so him to be able to speak to people's rationales and their mentalities upon things, and to really be able to understand like, hey, those were trained soldiers, but these are they're just guards. They want to go have a beer with their friends. They want to go like hang out with their wife and kids. They want to like relax after an honest day's work. They're not hired. They are hired guns to a certain extent, but they're not soldiers. And that's what they're dealing with. Like just him being able to rationalize that and understand that and speak to them honestly and bluntly in a way that resonates is great. But it also reflects upon these changes that we've seen in Wayne over the last several chapters, this section specifically, but this whole series as a whole. Like he is, I love where he's at, and I wouldn't have asked for a better speech from him in this moment.
Yeah, I think on the other side of that, I totally agree with you. I love the speech. I love the entirety of what he's really getting at here. We've been talking about how like Wayne is very good at imitating people and not understanding people. And this is the opposite. This is understanding the way we talked about this earlier, but it's like he's been like reading skin deep to some degree. And now he's past that. He's like, these guys aren't going to be into that naturally. And he's thinking about those things a little bit more, or at the very least, more apparently to us in this moment in context. So it's almost an immediate payoff for the conversation that we have with Wax at the beginning of the week, which is that like he can think about these things and consider them and rationalize that in his head now as a part of that change that you mentioned. So so good.
For sure.
So good. We then find ourselves confronted by the pair of clones once more, and Wax and Wayne decide to fight the other's clone, swapping and betting that they can take him.
Yeah. What my only thought about, like, first of all, brilliant. great change of pace, great shift in the combat. But my only like thought about this is, had they never considered that like a scenario in which not Wax defeats Wax and Wayne defeats not Wayne, and then not Wax has to face Wayne? Like,
okay, brain do hard bad.
Okay, that's a lot.
Gertruda and Dumad.
So
just the names.
Okay, just the names.
Gertruda and Dumad are the names.
Wayne defeats Gertruda.
Mm-hmm.
Dumad defeats Wax. And now Dumad has to face Wayne. Like, that never crossed their mind as like a consideration.
They thought they were going to win.
They thought they were both going to win. They never considered that one of them might fail.
Right.
And then they're fucked. They both have to win to not be fucked.
You're totally right. I don't want to. I'm definitely trying to not disparage that, because they also have the superpower versions of these things, right? They have additional abilities that stretch beyond the sort of normal convention of their counterparts' capabilities, right? Because of hemorrhagic spikes. But on top of that, I think that the other side that I really appreciate about this is it gets back to that skin deep thing. And I think especially in 65, when we talk about Gertruda, she is trying to imitate Wayne, but doesn't really understand Wayne, and that's the problem. And so I think to the same degree, because they're so focused on imitation, they aren't even considering the possibility of failure, because Wax and Wayne never fail.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's kind of my take. I totally understand where you're coming from, but these don't seem like logical characters to imprint that kind of a decision on. You know what I mean? Like, they're not thinking straight. Autonomy has gotten to them. They're also terrified for their own lives, which is weird, because Wax even gives an out to Gertruda at one point.
Right. That's true.
So I'm with you. I totally agree. Like, it is a little strange, but at the same time, it pays off well, works well in the story, and I think these characters aren't smart enough to, in my head and rationalization from everything that we see on screen, I'm not sure that they would have considered it genuinely.
Right.
But with that, we move into chapter 64, which is the final Marasi chapter of the week. And we move back to Marasi and the burning of the portal. This is an intense and quick chapter in which all of the Allomancers, of whom were in the room before, manage to burn all of the metals that they have inside of them and basically siphon the power, the raw investiture, we assume, from the portal to destroy it and try to close it. They're channeling everything that they can outwardly. There's these fits of the house, the facade is blown apart by the pushes that are going out. There's also the emotional waves that are again flooding over Marasi and everyone else as this is happening. And there's also Marasi charging her cubes in the slow fashion and also creating a slow bubble around her. So like time passing is interesting in that moment, right? Or is she just putting in the cubes?
Just into the cubes. She just
into the cubes. Yeah.
She just activates it when she puts it through the portal as a means of stopping it from going through.
I didn't know if she also was burning her. It wouldn't make a difference, I don't think, even if they were in the bubble.
She might have been also.
I think she probably was.
She probably would have been, but not in a way that didn't affect it would have encompassed everybody. So it
wouldn't have made
really
a difference.
Change.
Right. Yeah. Relative to what we understand, it wouldn't have changed anything. But anyway, regardless, if she is or if she isn't, I know that she's focusing on the cube at the very least. And she throws the cube through to end the attempt of Autonomy's army, this army of red and gold that we've been afraid of for books and books and books, the men of red and gold, from coming through the gate.
Yeah.
So,
I have so many questions about the very specific mechanics of this, and maybe we'll get answers to it. Maybe we won't, but we don't now. So I'm not going to dwell on it too much. But it is astounding to me that they're able to burn through so much. And maybe I don't have a proper understanding of the scale of the number of people that we're dealing with or the size of the portal that we're dealing with. It just feels like if we're making the comparison to Elend and all of the that made up Ruin's body, this feels like so much less metal.
Yeah, I think it
directly
is. I think that's the reality.
That's my best my best understanding is that this is just a small amount that made a small portal that one person could crawl through at a time, I'm fine with that. Like,
I assume the army is going to walk through, but I'm not sure that it's one person. But I would assume it's
at a time though. That's my point. Is how big is this portal?
She sees the army through it, so I have to imagine that it's at the very least.
Well, like I mean, but if you have a doorway, like think about a door. Think about like a door frame, and you look through it. You can see a lot more than what can come through at a single time.
Very true. Yep.
That's kind of where my rationale is coming from. Like this is a small portal, and over time the entire army could come through, but it's not like they could come through walking 20,000 strong, just marching through it. Like I don't know. I don't know. It's not clear. I want to know though. And like it just feels like such a small action to completely negate it in my head. Like it feels like there should have been more of a problem to close this whole thing.
I definitely understand that. The pool is vanishing as they burn, right? So like it is getting smaller. So I guess I assumed that it was probably a larger pool and then got smaller as they were continuing to like reach in. For me, my comparison is the Well of Ascension, of which seems to be like this full room size thing. And so I'm imagining something similar.
I'm also assuming
but it isn't described.
That the grenades took a lot of the weight off of this thing. Like my rationale is that those grenades can hold up a lot more metal than the people can themselves, and can also fill and drain a lot faster. So like she has 2 or 3 of them, whatever it is, and it just like my guess is that pulled a lot of weight.
Yeah, and she's not sure how much they can hold. She's just pumping it into it, kind of in a raw fashion. So it's very interesting too. I mean, there's this whole side of things inside of the story too that I really appreciate, which is that like harmonium, we haven't talked about this, I don't think ever, but harmonium is almost equated to uranium in its own way, where it is this incredible technology that is very unstable in certain circumstances and is very dangerous in certain circumstances. So that's interesting, especially considering it is his metal. And that means, is he maybe unstable in context? And I'm bringing this up inside this section because I feel like it fits with the general idea of autonomy and the powers that we're talking about. It's loosey-goosey. It's not well defined. That's a pitch of a question back.
I appreciate where you're going with that. I didn't really have that feeling. My understanding of its instability was because the 2 powers that create this being are inherently at odds with each other.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's where the instability comes from.
But it's got 2 functions too. That's the other side of it, right? Like it's got the explosive potential when it's split or applied with something else, right? Which is the atom bomb that we're basically seeing in the form of the threat for most of this book. But then on the other side of it, it is incredibly important to technology and like flight, for instance, the capabilities that it brings. So, and these cubes, I mean, seem to be, I think they're derived from metal, but maybe not. Don't remember.
I think they were.
I thought they were, but metal. Not 100% on that. Point being, though, is that it's like it can be used for good. It can be used for destruction in a very similar way. But I think that speaks to the instability of the whole thing because they're at odds with each other.
Right. Yeah. It's I just want more. I want more mechanical answers.
I want more. And I agree with you. I think for me, this is the chapter that is the least fulfilling for me out of the conclusion chapters that we have thus far, because it all happens so fast and there's so little explanation. I understand the pool shrinking and the way that just starts to happen, and the metal in the room and the radio vibrator part, like all this stuff, like it's well depicted. I can imagine the scene. Mostly I'm missing the critical details like size and scope and some of those things. So
right.
But I really like this as a resolution to the portal. It makes sense to me. But it does happen so fast that I have to like re-listen to this chapter 4 times. I also physically read it a couple of times, and it's like, okay, all right. Anyway, that's all we really have to talk about. But like, mission accomplished, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, they don't have the banner or a bomber to pose in front of, but
they don't yet have planes. Is that the joke?
It's not the joke, but it can be.
No, I know. I know. I got the joke, but yeah, good call.
They do need
a banner. So, all right. We go into chapter 65, leaving Marasi for the week. 65 is it was a hell of a thing to consider, like, notes and how to structure this. So I'm going to let it go a little loosey-goosey because this is effectively one kind of intense action sequence throughout it. There are a bunch of things that happen, but this is sort of the resolution of these clones, and as such, we hop between, like, Wax's and Wayne's perspectives as they're fighting their opposites and kind of making jokes at them. And I don't know, it's a great chapter, but it is a hard one to get in and get real clinical about versus the other chapters that we've talked about this week. So, going to kind of lead with a summary, and I'll basically just stop and let you fire off thoughts, and we'll kind of go through it that way. A little bit different, but
sure.
So, Wayne attacks Dumad, grappling him to stay close. Dumad is very annoyed by this and tells Wayne to fight Gertruda so that he can face Wax, of course, because they're both very upset about the concept and the prospect of not facing off against the person that they're copying. Wayne holds on to Dumad even as he flies through the air using steel pushes, and eventually traces where, like, he's drawing the power from and where he keeps the flask to eventually nick it later. Dumad manages to latch a set of handcuffs onto one of Wayne's wrists and eventually knocks Wayne off him. But that, like, it's beginning to keep him close. What'd you make of the Wayne Dumad half of the fight to begin with?
So the conversation that they have throughout this entire fight actually made the clones, for lack of a better term, obsession make a lot more sense to me. Maybe you could argue that it was a little bit ham-fisted, but I really gained a lot of insight into these characters through this conversation. So I can't complain about that too much. I appreciate the motivations of Dumad and not Gertrude. What's her fucking name?
Gertruda. You were close.
Gertruda. I was close. Yeah. Like, I appreciate their motivations a whole lot more after this back and forth between Dumad and Wayne.
Mm-hmm.
It's flawed still, of course, but at the very least, their obsession made sense.
Yeah. I'm with you. I think that I absolutely, this is what, like, validates them. Before this point, I was kind of like, clones, interesting, why? And then you get the context about autonomy and everything else in this section, and it's the only way that it works. This book does a lot very quickly, and that's kind of the timbre of, like, a lot of this book after part one, is it just sort of takes off and never stops. And so somehow it manages to do good things, like fit in these character building moments, to fit in some of the best villains of Mistborn so far in some ways. I mean, with Telsin and Brone being some of the most fleshed out characters. I still think Straff and Zane make a better pair of villains, but Telsin and Crew are right up there with them in my head. But yeah, I really love this. I love getting the motivation based on autonomy and this idea that, like, autonomy copying, like, that's interesting. That seems very hypocritical in its own way. But
yeah,
especially being that it's a focus on individualism, and it's interesting. It's fun to grapple with as a philosophical problem of this shard's intent.
Right.
Yeah. There's also the joke about wearing hats that I love here. I think this comes a little bit later. I think I'm maybe moving this up in order, but I love the joke about Wax and the hat, Wax and Wayne talking about the hat, and he's like, yeah, your bowler hat. And he's like, it's not a bowler hat, it's a coachman's hat, or something like that.
Wax talks about how he instinctively wants to shoot a short person wearing a bowler hat, or something like that.
Yeah. Right.
It definitely gave me it's a trilby, not a fedora kind of vibe.
It totally does. Yeah, that's a great point.
Because they're fucking the same. They're not.
Basically.
I get it. Who gives a shit? But that's the point.
The energy of it is very similar. Yeah. And I think Wax is also intentionally insulting him, because this happens at a moment after.
It's so tongue in cheek. Like, it's so. Right. It's so ribbing each other.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it. It was very, very fun.
Yeah. Because this kind of comes in the middle of combat as, like, a brief respite where they're, like, tucked behind a wall, basically, like, ducking while the others are also recouping, and they get to, like, rib each other as, like, an elbow nudge before resuming the fight, which, again, just makes for, like, a perfect action sequence that you can imagine in a superhero movie, kind of. So
right. Yeah.
Feels very, very superhero-y. So, getting over to the other fight, moving away from Wayne fighting Dumad and their conflict, Wax engages with Gertruda, eventually using a doorstop and other pieces of metal to repeatedly batter her and break her bones. It's particularly brutal what he does. He's like bashing her in the face, and I'm just like, I know that you have to do this, Wax, but Jesus. Like, that's a lot. Of course, she uses her metal mines to heal herself, and Wax's attacks show him where her metal mines are. He then pulls out and uses a haze killer round to blow her arm off, separating her from her source of healing. When Gertruda comes at him again, Wax kills her with a shot to the head, but he does give her a chance before he blows her arm off to just surrender, which I think is great.
Yeah.
But then she chooses not to, of course, and that's her path, and she's just bought
choice.
into the autonomy train. So
yeah. I loved this scene as well. Generally, that description of the arm being blown off and the amount of blood and how it's like less than you expect. Like everything about this scene was so visceral but amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I loved this. I can totally and look forward to, but I can totally imagine this scene being adapted to the screen, and it's gonna be brutal, fucking brutal, but so good.
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine it, and like you know how difficult it is for me to like really put visuals to things.
Yeah,
but this did a great job of it.
I'm so with you on that. I think that this is one of the best scenes of the combat. There's also, funny enough, she is obviously also imitating Wayne's humor, and then is also trying to imitate his darkness, I think, at one point during this, which is like, all right, girl, I get it. Like, you didn't get it because you're just skin deep and you only see what you hear via secondhand stories or your stalking or whatever else that gets you there. But there's this bit where Wax is like, is that the best that you can do? Wax said, backing away, dodging her strikes, but staying close enough to be inside of a speed bubble if she made one. Really, I thought you'd be harder than this. And she replies, stop quoting lines from your wife last night and fight me. And it's like, all right, that was a pretty good one. That was a pretty good one, Gertruda. I gotta give you that.
Didn't expect that from Branderson.
No, right. This is, again, I'm going to nudge the Gillian Redfern and stick one more time. Yeah. But
it felt very Borderlands combat.
Very. That's a good point. Almost like Moxie in a way. Like just as a character, like as a response sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's not Moxie. It could be, what's her name? Tina. Tiny Tina.
Yeah.
Kind of that sass. So. All right, of course, she's dead. So Wayne locks the free end of the handcuffs onto Dumad's wrist, and Dumad uses a duralumin and steel push to send them both flying into the air. Dumad tries to replenish his metals, but finds that Wayne has stolen his vial of metals from his pocket. They fall from a great height into a building. Dumad is killed by the fall, but Wayne survives due to his own healing, the little bit that he had saved up. Wayne almost gets in his great joke, but is just cut to just like a second or two short, and it's so great. It's like when you see death and then dies, it's a perfect beat of comedic timing.
That joke not having time to be delivered was so fucking good.
Yeah.
Like all of this banter was great, but that as the capper to it all was fucking perfect.
Yeah. It was great. The other bit that I really liked here from the fight with Dumad is the fact that he's leeching the abilities constantly, and Wayne just has so much fucking bend alloy. It doesn't matter. He's just like, whatever, more, whatever, more. It's great. So I love that. And yeah, that joke getting cut short, the entire fight scene, it's just so good. It's such a nice ending here to this. Anything else in the combat that I didn't mention that you wanted to talk about?
I feel like I feel like we could really truly go on for a couple hours on the conversation between Dumad and Wayne.
Mm-hmm.
But we got the major beats, and I think that's probably all we really need to talk about. It's just such a cool dynamic, and I feel like I'm operating with limited understanding.
Sure.
And maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm operating under the same understanding you are. I don't know yet. But I felt so satisfied by this final combat between them. It really, I'm happy with the way that this combat resolved.
I think I'm with you. I definitely enjoy the way that this all plays out pretty significantly. It's a great chapter. It's the longest one of the week, and I mean, we're covering it pretty quickly. There's one beat that I think that I kind of miss inside of the summary, and it is the idea that Wayne and Wax and Wayne both actually like really revere each other in their own ways, right? Like
that's true.
In this moment when they're fighting the other person, they're kind of like talking each other up as a negging to the other person, which is kind of funny. Mm-hmm. Especially Wayne to I believe he says Wax isn't a complete waste of a person, and that is such a good line to shoot back at this guy. I love that.
Mm-hmm. That was super good.
Yeah. For sure. It's all great. And it just shows that they genuinely care for each other and that they're, close friends in all of this. And like, obviously we didn't doubt that for a moment, but it's not something that you always see exposed. You just assume that it's there and you don't talk about it. And it's like, no, he's really important for this reason. So it's wholesome. Mm-hmm. It's great.
It is.
Kind of in a way that's being wielded as a joke and a tool against an imitator. So the chapter ends as Wax meets up with Wayne and puts in his hemalurgic earring to talk to Harmony. One other thing here I do want to mention. The body falls through the skylight, which is an important thing to clarify with Dumad in this scene, because it is ultimately the body that we stare at in 66. I just had to clarify that.
Yep, that's way more important than a lot of people probably think it is, for me, at least, because I didn't realize that.
We'll talk about that once we hit that in just a minute here. But anyway, it puts the earring in to kind of end the chapter to talk with Harmony.
Yeah, comms on.
All right. So we get into our final chapter of the week here, chapter 66. We start with Wax having a conversation with Harmony about doing his part in all of this, since Wax is upholding his side of the deal. We get more from him that autonomy won't intervene, but that he can choose to stun Telsin, which plays into kind of the end of this that we'll discuss, and only if autonomy chooses to withdraw from her in those moments. He also makes mention during the conversation that other odd things are happening to him, and Harmony says, "It's something else, but it didn't work as I'd hoped." What do you think this is? What do you make of the whole bit? What do you make of the ability for Harmony to only intervene in this small way? What's rattling around that old brain cage?
Like, there's just so much. There's just so much rattling around. I really want to know what's going on first and foremost with the vials. That my assumption is directly connected to what Harmony's talking about here, saying like, I expected it to go one way, but it went another. Like, I think that pulls Wayne into the mix. Like, I think there's something very specific happening here, and I don't get it yet. Like, I know there's something. Fuck. Then there's, like, his ability to affect Telsin is dependent upon, like, so he knows he's able to have this last ditch blinding sort of a stunning effect, but understanding that it requires autonomy to withdraw from this person at the same time means that like this is a nuke, but very, very tactical. Like it's a very specific, like, we need to figure out how to get autonomy to want to withdraw and have this be the last straw, effectively.
Yeah, that's totally it. You do want this to be the last straw, and you want this to be kind of the breaking point. It is. I love that you use the term tactical nuke to talk about this, especially considering the fact that we are literally dealing with a nuke in theory up until this point.
I know.
So, yeah, it's very, very intentional.
But like the term tactical nuke doesn't really have an effective use. Most of it, it feels oxymoronic.
Totally.
in a lot of ways, but like this is the one scenario where it makes sense. Like it is utterly destroying every like a person's being as a means of surgically removing them from the playing field.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So
I just had a moment of revelation. We'll talk about it in a moment. Yeah, it is. I think it is totally an oxymoron. I think that is what is so interesting about that being brought up, because it is something that is just so outside of the realm of usual possibility. But also, we know from our understanding of Harmony, he refuses to intervene in so many circumstances. And so for Wax to have pushed him to be like, all right, your fucking turn to do something here is a big deal as well.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
And it is a tactical nuke, but it's honestly, I feel like it's unexpected to some degree.
Right.
For him to have responded this way, to be like, okay, you're right, I need to do something. I can't just be idle and stand by. We then move to the confrontation with our villain and talking about the bomb. And this section switches from a combat massacre to Wax working it all out as a detective. He realizes that the bomb isn't here, that this is an empty shell. Wax looks far out into the distance and makes out the class warship that is out there, and he just like recognizes it, and that he is very confident that the bomb is there. What did you make of this?
I mean, this is a water ship, right? Not an airship.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They talk about the docks. They talk about like all of the other components that go into,
that. I mean, they talk about they never mention water. Like you can have airship docks.
Fair point.
It throws my prediction out a little bit. There's the Malwish warship. It's described the same way as a show of force in a warship hovering over Elendel.
You're not fucking wrong, are you?
So like it pushes my prediction off to the wayside, but I feel like my prediction, like the spirit of my guess, is still pretty true. So I wasn't totally surprised by this reveal. I just expected it to be dropped from a Malwish warship, not launched short range from an aircraft carrier. Effectively.
I mean, do you think that they're launching the rocket, or do you think that they're just driving it in?
They'd have a much better time of it if they can just get within like half a mile of Elendel and like launch from the sea.
But they do reveal over the course of this that like they didn't really have any luck with the development for the most part. Like,
but that's for long. Like that's like North Korea developing nuclear warheads that can travel 800 miles. Like that's not the same thing. You can develop much more easily a short range rocket. So like I feel like they've developed a short range rocket and they're trying to develop a long range one. They're not able to do it, but they have this as a backup, and they can launch it from like half mile off the coast.
I just want to push back against that a little bit. I don't think it's a breaking point for this by any stretch, but Wax does literally say the rockets never worked, not well enough. And then Telson basically explains that like advanced ballistics were outside of our capability. So I don't know that they ever had any that worked.
I can understand that. My thought is advanced ballistics is long range ballistics. Like that's where I'm going with it.
It's, also, again, like, I think it's
logistically,
minutia,
what are you gonna do? Just bringing a warship? Like, is it a suicide bomb? And you're only gonna hit the coast? Is it big enough that it can like encompass in its radius the entirety of Elendel?
One assumes, yeah. That would be my assumption, right? Is like it's more than probably what we would describe to a standard atomic bomb's power based on the tiny blast that we saw,
Yeah. Okay.
So
I can buy it. I just my immediate thought was they hadn't been able to convert the development from short range to long range missiles.
Yeah.
So they're going with short range from sea.
That makes sense. For the record, we're at the end of the show, and I'm just now finishing my straight-up main drink, which is crazy.
I am a sip away from finishing the
and I have
whiskey
like a finger of whiskey left.
Well, you also had a a full ice cube in yours.
Fair. I did water mine down with ice cube because there's also some overproofs in there that are very strong. So I had to add ice or some water in theory. But okay. Yeah, I mean, the bomb. So did you have any other thoughts about like her side of the conversation as far as it goes with talking about the weapon? Or like what she was doing? Do you think she was just stalling? What do you make of the way that she
felt very much like she was stalling, especially considering the amount of like shrugs and like stoically looking aways that she does. Like it felt she knew what she was doing, and she knew it was trying to keep him on the hook as long as possible. Because the only point of like horror or like surprise that she shows is when he just kicks over the fucking like decoy.
Yeah, right. That's the only time that she's really shocked. I think the one thing that I find both to me is the most Bond villain of any of the villains inside of the Mistborn series to some degree. But I think one of the things that I don't like about her, unlike most Bond villains, is that she doesn't get her hands dirty almost at all in this series, or rather in this book. She does get her hands dirty a little bit in Bands of Mourning with her choice to shoot Wax, right? Like that's a big deal. But she doesn't at all in this. So that's minor gripe. I really like the story. And I love her as a villain, and I love the sibling villain thing in this case. But I've got that like tiny little gripe, tiny little one.
That's fair.
He's a little guy, but
just a little guy.
Just a little gripe. So there are two more things that I want to talk about to round out the week, but starting this off with a quote here. She thought you'd find it. I think she prefers you to me. I'm not sure how I feel about that, Telson says to Wax. And Telson's obviously a lot over the course of this week as we see her kind of culmination as the villain of the story and kind of the big deal and sort of this event of defending the tower and this diehard status. We're talking with Hans Gruber finally confronted. She wants Wax to give it up, believing that she's kind of lost in the middle of all of this. Her eyes are glowing deeper red. She's getting kind of into this almost trance-like state where she's just reciting these things. Very reminiscent to me also of what happened to Miles' 100 Lives in the beginning of Alloy of Law. But she's expressing her hatred, being pushed to her own emotional red line, as it's described, or spiritual red line, perhaps. And then Wax calls for Harmony to cut her off, stuns her, and she drops to the rooftop, which is really just to the ground. She just fell. She just collapsed. She didn't drop, really.
I was so mad. I was so upset at the end of this section. And I would have been had we not had a conversation about this before we started recording. But I totally and completely thought that this was the end of Telson. And that like immediately when like after this scene, Wax looks down and sees a corpse on the ground at the bottom of the tower. I assumed, I feel like rightfully so, like I don't understand how I understand. Okay. Because of the way we structure this show, I don't immediately go into 67. So I don't know at this point if this corpse is Telson. I assume that it is because we were just talking about Telson dropping to the ground. So like I was so mad at this being and disappointed. I guess I was disappointed with this being the climactic end to this villain. But it seems like that is actually not Wax. That's where his fucking name is. I can never remember it.
Dumont.
Dumont.
There's something more interesting about this now that I'm doubling into it. For the record, I'm totally with you on that. I actually legitimately texted you yesterday and I was like, well, there's Telson. And you went, yeah, that was, I think I also said that's a little unsatisfying and then, or unclear, I think is the word that I used. You're like, yeah, it was very unclear because we try not to talk about these things off air so that we preserve our feelings to talk about them together. But that was one thing where it was like, when I finished, I was like, yep, there we are. But then I realized that I was totally wrong as I was reflecting on it this morning, writing the notes for this. I was like, wait, that's not true. And I had to like read and double back. I think that it is. And now I'm thinking about this right now, right? Like I'm just having this revelation in the moment. it is fascinating for Wax to be looking down at Dumad, seeing what would have became of him likely if he would have chased the same track that Telsin did, if he would have agreed to join, if he would have gone that path. So that's what I'm realizing the end of this is more about, is kind of reflecting on that body at the bottom, being like, this could have been me. But it doesn't mean that it's not confusing and that's not almost impossible to parse versus the context that's given in the moment.
For the amount of ham-fistedness that Branderson has expressed throughout this section, he couldn't have at least been a little bit more obtuse in this moment. Like, he could have been a little bit more obvious, a little bit more explicit.
Yeah.
Like, why is here the point where he wants to be mysterious and unclear? I get it. That's a beautiful commentary.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, like I said, maybe it's a function of the way we structure the show, in that, like, maybe 67 immediately makes it more clear. I don't know.
I think to be perfectly frank, I've talked about this a couple of times. I don't know that I've talked about it during the show, but when I finished reading, I think I texted you and I was like, I think I meant to include 67 this week, but I didn't want to take away from all the dramatic conversation that happens around the climax, because, not that it's a big spoiler or anything, but we go to Steris's perspective to bring that part of the story back into focus. And it would have been good to have an update on Steris this week, and I kind of feel bummed that we don't, but we'll get it next week. So, as we end the book. That said, did you have any other thoughts on this Telsin comment? Because I have one more thing that I want to talk about.
No, go for it.
Okay. So the final bit that I want to talk about, PJ, is we are approaching the end of the book. How does the book end? What are your... I mean, I know for Red Rising, as we talk about like the end of series and even Mistborn, we did kind of like death pools and stuff like that. We didn't even approach that in this one. Just it doesn't need to be who lives, who dies, but like, what are your thoughts for how this story culminates?
I think this pullout, so to speak, from... So I guess assuming that Telsin is properly stunned, it means that autonomy has pulled out of her. Okay. And I think that means she's not as directly rooted in this world as she would want to be, which gives Harmony, I think, the opportunity to drive her away.
Okay.
That's my assumption. Just based on the solemn sort of onlooking that Wayne has done, I think we see his demise. I think he's come to this place where he sees these stories that he's been told and recognizes himself as a character that perishes, and I think that's going to manifest. Just based on how he's been...
But he saw himself as the villain. You know what I mean?
He did.
That story. Yeah.
He did initially. That's a good point.
Hey, hold up. 1 second. I want to return to this prediction. Okay. We've been talking about the prologue and kind of thoughts on the prologue. Blatant Barnes is the Mesa, right? Or Wayne believes that he is the villain. Blatant Barnes is the villain. The Mesa is confronting yourself.
Yeah.
And that's Wayne's arc. Is confronting himself. In that moment, right? So like he's like, we're approaching the Mesa as this physical thing. It's not a physical thing. It's an emotional thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point.
Fuck. Okay. I didn't expect that to click. And it just did when you were saying that. I was like, oh, the story, that connects back here. That makes so much sense because if the villain is that and he believes himself to be the villain, then he's facing the villain as himself. Duh. Yeah, anyway.
That's
so
fair.
He kind of clears the story before that point.
He does.
I believe it's separate from your predictions, but
no, it's separate. It's separate from my predictions, but it's not, and that kind of takes away from my feelings of it. So,
okay.
I don't know. It still feels somber enough that like that could come true. I hope not. I don't want him to die. Like everything moving forward feels like Wayne's last hurrah to a certain degree. Marcy, I feel like is...
Ooh, she's a good one. Ghost Bloods or no, I think is maybe the question.
I think she goes Ghost Bloods. And I think she is deep enough within constabulary to understand that her theoretical understanding of politics and lawmaking and law enforcing isn't enough to make you a good person. And this is going to give her the opportunity to go forward in a less than official capacity of upholding the law and not upholding the law, but of keeping people safe in a way that's more effective.
Yeah. I want to just rewind just the smidgest of smidges on what you said. It's not so much that it's not that she doesn't think that she's a good person. It's that she could have more good elsewhere, right? Or she could do more good elsewhere. Just making sure. Because I'm like, I don't think she has that problem. But
she doesn't have that problem. But we do see a slip in her. Like, not that she's slipping and becoming a bad person, but she is becoming less to the book constable. Because she understands that people aren't what they look like in a textbook. And it takes a much more morally gray approach to really be effective in this line of work. And she loves what she does, but she loves it because of the effect, not because of the actual job or the position. So I think the Ghost Bloods will afford her an opportunity to be exactly what she wants to be and provide just as much help as she desires to provide to the people, even though it's not in the same official capacity as it would have been as a constable. And that's only ushered along by the catalyst of being led by Kelsier, her literal religious figure as a child.
Yes. Right. Okay. I dig that. I think that leaves us with Wax and Steris and maybe Harmony if you've got ideas.
I think Wax fully retires. And I think if he's able to, like, I think he removes himself as a senator.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think he steps down as a senator. I think he steps down in every official capacity. And I think he spends all of his time with his children and his wife. Assuming autonomy moves out, I think they move to Bilming to be away from the Elendel influence.
Okay. All right. I feel like that encompasses Steris, but do you have other thoughts? It doesn't fully encompass Steris.
It doesn't.
It does.
It doesn't fully encompass her, but it kind of de facto does, right? Like, I can't think of.
I mean, yeah. What's the resolution of her arc? Do you think? Like, obviously, the retirement and like going to Bilming, like that does. But like, what's her culmination at the end of this? Like, what's her impact?
Maybe she becomes a consultant of some sort or an author. She is contracted, or what's the word? Not hired, but like she's contracted to write policy and write disaster plans or contingency plans for different scenarios that cities can use as a template for emergency plans.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Final one, Harmony, I think. Unless you've got another one that you want to put on the plate.
No, that's pretty much everybody. Harmony, hopefully he just gets to rest for a while. Like, he has been accused of being impotent for such a long time, but he's been exhausted. And he's been worked in a way that, like, is counter to how he actually is able to function. Yeah, my hope is that he can just kind of sleep for a bit. And regain some strength. I think it'd be best
so a
for
god
everybody.
nap, yeah, like a
god nap.
God nap.
He needs a god nap.
It's a god nap, yeah. Cool. Final call on this. Just one more final prediction, just because it's fun. Do you have an update on what you think the lost metal is?
Friendship.
Nice. I'll take it. The friends that we made along the way. Cool. All right. I won't hold you accountable for that one versus everything else, but cool. All right. Well, PJ, that's where we end. Do you have anything else on this week?
Do we have any predictions to uphold?
Interesting. So, PJ's previous predictions, we're going to roll into these. We've got a couple here that I've kind of let sit for a little bit for various reasons on like finishing episodes and stuff like that. And like we didn't really get full answers, so I was waiting for full answers in some cases. But in this one we're looking at here, she also turns in the spikes, but requests to retain the Trillium one for now, given the circumstance with this evil god lurking about, and that she's going to bring it to Wax for experimentation. Obviously, we end this week on this as one of our many dangling threads, but I'd love for you to pick at what you think the Trillium spike could actually be and what it might do.
So my answer to this was, I think that it can imbue some bit of possession. We get the spikes allowing for communication and hearing thoughts from Harmony, so maybe it takes on a similar ability, but for the body rather than the mind.
This is interesting. Go ahead.
I don't think I'm on it.
I don't think you're that far off it, though, is the other part. Like, it is
Fair.
Ultimately, in the way that we've seen things, is like it is a little bit of possession in the end, right? Because, like, when the driver dies in the car, it is kind of possession. That person seems dead, and autonomy is speaking through them because of the spike, we assume. On top of that, it is kind of like a two-way radio, so, you know, but it is more the mind than the body. So my thing is here, I think I'm willing to cheers and split it because of that. So cheers. I think you're 50% right, and the bits that you're wrong are fine. So broadsheet 2, any thoughts? You pitched these as different thoughts.
Terrace Air Editor, Earthquakes and Bilming is the same. Is this the same broadsheet we were reading in the previous chapter? I assume so. And Alamancer Jack has a sidekick, or had a sidekick, with the same pseudo last name as Wayne. Why is this a prediction?
Because of I marked it because of the earthquakes in Bilming and their relevance to the story that you didn't understand at the time, and then also the missing Terrace editor. So while it is a different editor, it is one of the editors of that paper, of whom replaced the previous one according to the broadsheets. So we are aware that there are 2 missing editors from the same broadsheet. So you nailed it without knowing that you nailed it. It's kind of the deal. So I take the drink.
Okay.
There. Cheers.
Cool.
Because those predictions were kind of off the wall, so I'm down. So we don't have a resolution to that one. Those were the 2. So next week we will pay off the rest of these. There aren't that many, but we did just do a slew of them to end this. So PJ, next week is the end of the Lost Metal, the end of Era 2. This is going to be fun. It's going to be very interesting. I'm very excited to chat about the whole thing and to finally have it all out there to some degree. Like, you'll practically be at the same spot in the Cosmere as, at the very least, within the Mistborn stories. There's some, tangential things that I can't really talk about, but we were also fully caught up at Bands of Mourning, but now we'll be like fully caught up together again. So, yeah, with the resolution. So yeah, next week we were reading chapters 67 through the final epilogue, because there are a couple. So, just so you're aware. So that's where we'll leave you for this week.
Thank you, as always, to Tim and Andrew, our producers, for helping us keep our show's lights on. You can check out the links in the show notes, where you can find our schedule, our Patreon, our previous episodes, our websites, all of our social media accounts in one very nice, easy, convenient location.
Yes. In case you can't find those nice, easy locations, you can also manually search us Words Whiskey Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Reddit, wordsandwhiskeyshow@gmail.com, patreon.com/words and whiskey, and our t-shirts are presently on TeePublic. I can tell you, we did get our first screen print recently, and we are running tests now. It's very exciting. So we're beginning the process of converting a lot of those things over. That is kind of the exciting update there to some degree, is we're going to own a lot more of the process, and a lot of manual love and attention on these shirts. So we're very excited for that, in addition to so many other things. PJ, there's so much going on right now in our show, in our world, and I love it.
There is. In less than 12 hours, we're going to be recording another episode.
Oh my God. It's 11 hours, motherfucker. All right. So I have to go finish those notes. Cool. We love you very dearly. In case you want to listen to that other episode, by the way, it's going to be talking about Tress and the Emerald Sea, or Tress of the Emerald Sea. And we're very excited to talk about Secret Project 1 soon. So enjoy, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.